My sister stole my fiancé, got pregnant, and my parents demanded my trust fund. But they never saw my revenge coming at our family gathering. I've always believed in second chances. I'm Lauren, 29 years old, and I've spent most of my life trying to see the best in people even when they let me down. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, I was the responsible sister, the one who got straight A's, worked hard, and never caused trouble. My younger sister Megan, 26, was the opposite. She was wild, impulsive, and always the center of attention. Our parents adored her, often overlooking her mistakes while holding me to a higher standard. I didn't mind too much. I loved Megan, and I thought we had a good relationship despite our differences. But that all changed 6 months ago, when I found out the worst betrayal of my life. I'd been with my fiancé, Ethan, for 3 years. We met in college, and he was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner: kind, funny, and ambitious. He was a graphic designer, and I worked as a financial analyst, so we'd spent years building a life together, saving for a house and planning our wedding. Ethan proposed last year on a quiet beach at sunset, and I'd never been happier. Megan seemed happy for us too, always joking about being the cool aunt to our future kids. I trusted her. I trusted Ethan. I had no reason not to. But 3 months ago, everything fell apart. I'd been working late on a big project, so I hadn't noticed the signs at first: Ethan's sudden work trips, Megan's odd excuses for not hanging out, the way they'd both get quiet when I walked into a room. Then one night, I came home early and found them together in our apartment. They weren't just talking, they were in my bed, tangled in the sheets, their clothes scattered on the floor. I stood there, frozen, as Ethan scrambled to cover himself, his face pale with guilt. Megan just looked at me, her expression a mix of defiance and shame. "Lauren, I can explain," Ethan stammered, but I didn't let him finish. I grabbed my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold them, and walked out. I drove to a friend's house, my mind racing with what I'd just seen. How could they do this to me? Ethan, the man I was supposed to marry, and Megan, my own sister. I spent the night crying on my friend's couch, trying to make sense of it all, but the pain was too raw, too overwhelming. The next day, Megan called me, her voice trembling as she begged to meet. I agreed, hoping for some kind of explanation, some shred of remorse that could help me understand. We met at a coffee shop, and that's when she dropped the bombshell. "I'm pregnant," she said, her eyes fixed on the table, unable to meet mine. "It's Ethan's. It happened a few weeks ago, and I'm keeping the baby." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My sister, me little sister, was pregnant with my fiancé's child. I stared at her, my mouth open, unable to form words. "How could you?" I finally whispered, my voice breaking. "You knew how much I loved him, Megan. You were supposed to be my maid of honor." She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with tears. But there was something else there too, something that looked like defiance. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her tone defensive. "Ethan and we just connected. He said you were always working, that you didn't have time for him. I'm sorry, Lauren, but I love him. And he loves me." I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor as I grabbed my bag. "You're sorry?" I said, my voice rising as I fought back tears. "You slept with my fiancé, got pregnant, and you think sorry fixes this? You're my sister, Megan. You were supposed to have my back." I walked out, ignoring her calls after me, and blocked her number. I did the same with Ethan. I couldn't handle hearing their excuses, their justifications. I moved out of the apartment I'd shared with Ethan, staying with my friend while I looked for a new place. I thought that would be the end of it, that I could cut them out of my life and start over. But my family had other plans. A few weeks later, my parents called me, asking me to come over for dinner. I hadn't spoken to them much since the breakup, but I assumed they wanted to check on me, to offer some kind of support. I was wrong. When I arrived at their house, Megan was there, her hand resting on her barely visible bump, Ethan sitting beside her like they were some happy couple. My stomach churned at the sight of them, but I forced myself to stay, hoping my parents would at least take my side. "Lauren, we need to talk," my mom said, her tone serious as she set a plate of lasagna on the table. "Megan and Ethan are together now, and they're starting a family. We know this is hard for you, but we need to think about the baby. I stared at her, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. What are you saying? I asked, my voice low. My dad cleared his throat, his expression uncomfortable but resolute. Your grandmother left you a trust fund, Lauren, he said. It's a lot of money, 50, 0. We think you should give it to Megan and Ethan to help them get started. They're going to need it for the baby, and you're doing well on your own. It's the right thing to do. I felt like I'd been slapped. My grandmother had passed away 5 years ago, leaving me the trust fund as a safety net, a reward for my hard work and responsibility. It was money I'd planned to use for my future, for the house Ethan and I were supposed to buy, for our wedding, for our own family. And now my parents wanted me to give it to the people who'd betrayed me, who'd shattered my life without a second thought. No, I said, my voice shaking with anger as I stood up. That money is mine. Grandma left it to me, not Megan, not Ethan. They made their choices. They don't get to take this from me too. Megan's face turned red, her hands clenching into fists. You're so selfish, Lauren, she snapped. I'm having a baby. We need that money more than you do. You've always had everything. Why can't you just let me have this? I looked at my parents, hoping they'd say something, anything to defend me, but they just sat there, their expressions a mix of guilt and expectation. Lauren, please, my mom said, her voice soft. Think about your niece or nephew. This is about family. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head as I grabbed my coat. Family? I said, my voice breaking. You don't get to talk about family after what Megan did. You're choosing her over me, just like you always have. But I'm done. I'm not giving you a cent. I walked out, their voices calling after me, but I didn't stop. As I drove home, my anger turned into something sharper: resolve. Megan, Ethan, and my parents thought they could take everything from me and I'd just roll over. They thought I'd give in, like I always had, for the sake of family. But they were wrong. I wasn't going to let them win. I had a plan, and when I was done, they'd see just how much they'd underestimated me. The days after that disastrous dinner at my parents' house were a blur of anger and heartbreak. I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my head. Megan sitting there with Ethan, her hand on her stomach, acting like she deserved my sympathy. My parents looking at me like I was the unreasonable one for not handing over my trust fund. I'd spent my whole life trying to be the good daughter, the one who never made waves, who always put family first. But now I saw it for what it was, a one-way street. They'd taken my loyalty for granted, and when Megan betrayed me in the worst way possible, they didn't even hesitate to take her side. I was done. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, a one-bedroom place I could barely afford on my salary as a financial analyst. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and it was far away from the memories of the life I'd planned with Ethan. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects to keep my mind off the pain. But every night, when I was alone in my new place, the hurt came rushing back. I'd trusted Megan, I'd trusted Ethan, and my parents, who were supposed to protect me, had chosen to support the people who'd shattered my life. The 50-0 trust fund my grandmother had left me was the one thing I had left, a safety net I'd planned to use for my future, and they wanted to take that too. I knew I couldn't let this go. Megan and Ethan had already taken so much from Memi relationship, my sense of security, my trust in my family. I wasn't going to let them take my money too. But more than that, I wanted them to feel the consequences of their actions. I wanted my parents to see that they couldn't just dismiss me, that I wasn't going to roll over and let them walk all over me. I started thinking about how to fight back, how to make them understand the pain they'd caused. The first thing I did was secure the trust fund. I called the lawyer who'd managed my grandmother's estate, a kind older man named Mr. Thompson, who'd always been fond of me. I explained the situation: Ethan's betrayal, Megan's pregnancy, my parents' demand for the money. Mr. Thompson listened quietly, his tone sympathetic but professional. Lauren, that trust fund is in your name, he said. Your parents have no legal claim to it, and neither does your sister. But if you're worried, I can put a hold on the account to ensure no one else can access it. I felt a wave of relief at his words. Yes, please, I said, my voice steady. I don't want anyone touching it. It's mine. He assured me he'd take care of it. And by the end of the day, the trust fund was locked down. Knowing the money was safe gave me a small sense of control, but it wasn't enough. I needed to do more. I needed to make Megan, Ethan, and my parents face the reality of what they'd done. I started by digging into Megan's life, looking for anything I could use to hold her accountable. I knew she wasn't as perfect as she pretended to be. She'd always been reckless, and I had a feeling there were skeletons in her closet. I went through her social media, scrolling through months of posts, looking for anything that might give me leverage. That's when I found something interesting, a series of photos from a few months back, before she'd gotten pregnant, showing her at a bar with a guy I didn't recognize. The captions were flirty, and the comments from her friends hinted at a fling. One of them even said, "Does Ethan know about this?" Megan had replied with a winking emoji, brushing it off, but it planted a seed of doubt in my mind. Had she been seeing someone else while she was with Ethan? If so, was she even sure the baby was his? I saved the screenshots, my heart racing as I realized I might have something I could use. But I needed more than speculation. I needed proof. I reached out to a mutual friend, Tara, who'd always been closer to Megan than me but had stayed neutral after the fallout. I called her, keeping my tone casual as I asked if she knew anything about Megan's life before she got pregnant. Tara hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but eventually she opened up. "Look, Lauren, I don't want to get in the middle of this," she said, her voice low. "But yeah, Megan was seeing some guy named Jake for a while. It was around the same time she started, with Ethan. I don't know if it overlapped, but she was pretty secretive about it." I thanked Tara, my mind racing as I hung up the phone. If Megan had been with someone else, there was a chance the baby wasn't Ethan's. And if I could prove that, it would turn their perfect little narrative upside down. I decided to hire a private investigator, a discreet professional named Carla who came highly recommended by a coworker. I gave her the information I had, the photos, the name Jake, the timeline, and asked her to dig deeper. "I just need to know the truth," I told her. "Whatever you find, I want to know." While Carla worked on that, I started planning my next move. I wanted to confront Megan, Ethan, and my parents, but I wanted to do it in a way that would make them feel the weight of their betrayal. I decided to host a family gathering at a local community center, a neutral space where I could control the narrative. I invited my parents, Megan and Ethan, telling them I wanted to talk things out and move forward as a family. My mom sounded relieved on the phone, saying she was glad I was willing to work things out. But I could tell Megan was suspicious. She barely responded to my text, just a curt, "Fine, I'll be there." I also invited a few extended family members, me Aunt Linda, who'd always been fair, and my cousin Brian, who'd never been a fan of Megan's antics. I wanted witnesses, people who could see the truth for themselves. I spent the next few days preparing, gathering the evidence I had so far, the screenshots of Megan's posts, the timeline of her fling with Jake, and a copy of the trust fund documents showing it was legally mine. I also wrote a letter to my parents, laying out exactly how their actions had made me feel, how they'd chosen Megan over me, how they'd failed me as a family. I wasn't sure if I'd read it at the gathering, but having it ready made me feel stronger. As the day of the gathering approached, I felt a mix of nerves and determination. I knew this wouldn't be easy, confronting my family, exposing Megan's lies, standing up for myself in a way I never had before. But I also knew I had to do it, not just for me, but for the future I deserved. One where I wasn't constantly sacrificing for people who didn't value me. Megan, Ethan, and my parents thought they could take everything from me and I'd just accept it. They thought I'd give in, like I always had. But they were about to learn just how wrong they were. If my family's betrayal makes your blood boil, hit that like button and tell me in the comments, would you fight back like this? I need to hear your thoughts. The day of the family gathering arrived, and I felt a mix of nerves and determination as I set up the community center room I'd rented. I'd chosen a neutral space on purpose. I didn't want to confront my family in their territory, where they'd feel comfortable dismissing me. The room was simple, with a long table, a few chairs, and a small refreshment table I'd set up with coffee and cookies, more for appearances than anything else. I placed my folder of evidence on the table, screenshots of Megan's social media posts, the timeline I'd pieced together of her fling with Jake, and the trust fund documents showing it was legally mine. I also had the letter I'd written to my parents, tucked into my bag in case I needed it. I was ready. My Aunt Linda and cousin Brian arrived first, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. Linda gave me a warm hug, her voice soft as she asked, "Are you sure you want to do this, Lauren? I know things have been rough." I nodded, managing a small smile. "I have to," I said. "They need to see what they've done." Brian clapped me on the shoulder, his tone supportive. "We've got your back," he said. "Megan's been out of line for years. It's about time someone called her out." My parents arrived next, their faces tight with unease. My mom tried to hug me, but I stepped back, keeping my distance. "Let's just get through this," I said, my voice firm. My dad nodded, avoiding my gaze as he took a seat. Megan and Ethan came in last, walking in together like they were some united front. Megan's baby bump was more noticeable now, and she rested her hand on it as if to remind everyone of her situation. Ethan wouldn't meet my eyes, his shoulders hunched as he sat beside her. The tension in the room was palpable, and I could feel everyone's eyes on me as I stood at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. "I asked you here because I need to address what's happened over the last few months. Megan, you slept with Ethan, me fiancé, and got pregnant. That alone was a betrayal I never thought I'd have to face. But then you and Mom and Dad had the audacity to demand my trust fund, the money Grandma left to me, to support your new family. I've spent my whole life trying to be the good daughter, the good sister, but I'm done. You don't get to take everything from me and expect me to just accept it." Megan's face turned red, her hands clenching into fists on the table. "You're making this all about you, Lauren," she snapped, her voice sharp. "I'm having a baby. Ethan and I are in love. We need that money more than you do. You're just being selfish like always." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head as I opened my folder. "Selfish?" I said, my tone icy. "Let's talk about selfish, Megan. I did some digging, and I found out you weren't exactly faithful to Ethan either." I slid the screenshots of her social media posts across the table, the ones showing her with Jake at the bar. "You were seeing this guy, Jake, around the same time you started sleeping with Ethan. There's a chance that baby isn't even his, isn't there?" The room went silent, the air thick with shock. Ethan's head snapped up, his eyes wide as he looked at Megan. "What is she talking about?" he asked, his voice low. Megan's face went pale, her hands trembling as she stared at the screenshots. That's not true," she stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Jake was just a friend. You're trying to ruin everything, Lauren." "I'm not the one ruining things," I said, my voice steady as I turned to Ethan. "You might want to look into a paternity test, Ethan, because if that baby isn't yours, Megan's been lying to you too." Ethan's face darkened, and he turned to Megan, his jaw tight. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Were you with someone else?" Megan opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned to my parents, pulling out the trust fund documents. "And you two," I said, my voice rising with anger. "You had the nerve to demand I give up the money Grandma left me. Money I earned by being responsible, by working hard, while you've always let Megan get away with everything. You chose her over me, even after she betrayed me in the worst way possible. Do you have any idea how that feels?" My mom's eyes filled with tears, her hands covering her mouth as she shook her head. "Lauren, we didn't mean to hurt you," she said, her voice breaking. "We just thought the baby needs a good start. We thought you'd understand." "I don't understand," I said, my voice cracking as I fought back tears. "I needed you. I needed my family, and you turned your back on me. You made me feel like I didn't matter, like my pain didn't matter, but I'm done letting you make me feel that way." I turned to the rest of the room, my aunt and cousin watching with wide eyes. "I invited you here as witnesses," I said, my voice steady, "because I want everyone to know the truth. Megan, Ethan, and my parents thought they could take everything from me fiancé, my trust fund, my dignity, and I'd just take it. But I'm not that person anymore. I've protected my trust fund, it's legally mine, and no one can touch it. And Megan, I've already sent evidence of your past to people who might be interested. You're not as untouchable as you think." Megan's face crumpled, and she started to cry, her hands covering her face. Ethan stood up, his expression a mix of anger and confusion as he looked between us. "I need to know the truth, Megan," he said, his voice low. "If that baby isn't mine, we're done." He walked out, leaving Megan sobbing at the table. My dad stood up, his face red with anger. "Lauren, this has gone too far," he said, his voice gruff. "You're tearing this family apart." "No, Dad," I said, my voice cold. "You did that when you chose Megan over me. I'm just making sure you all feel the consequences." I turned to my aunt and cousin, who were watching with a mix of shock and admiration. "Thank you for being here," I said. "I needed you to see this." I walked out of the community center, my heart pounding but my head held high. I'd said what I needed to say, and I'd made sure Megan and my parents knew I wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore. I didn't know what would happen next, whether Ethan would leave Megan, whether my parents would ever truly understand the pain they'd caused, but I knew one thing for sure. I was done being the good sister, the good daughter. I was going to fight for myself, and no one was going to take that away from me. Walking out of the community center after that confrontation felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control, like I'd finally stood up for myself in a way I never had before. Megan's sobs, Ethan's stunned exit, my parents' guilty silence, it all replayed in my mind as I drove home, but instead of pain, I felt a strange sense of peace. I'd said what I needed to say, and I'd made sure they understood the consequences of their actions. They'd underestimated me, thinking I'd just give in, but I'd shown them I wasn't the same Lauren they could push around. I was done being the good sister, the good daughter. I was fighting for myself now. The next few days were a whirlwind. My Aunt Linda called me the morning after the gathering, her voice full of admiration. "I've never seen you like that, Lauren," she said. "You were so strong. I'm proud of you for standing up to them. Megan needed to hear it, and so did your parents." I thanked her, my heart swelling with gratitude for her support. My cousin Brian texted me too, saying he'd always known Megan was trouble and that I'd handled it like a total boss. Their words meant more to me than I could express. I'd felt so alone in this mess, and knowing I had some family on my side gave me the strength to keep going. I also got a call from Carla, the private investigator I'd hired. She'd tracked down Jake, the guy Megan had been seeing, and had some news. "I spoke to him," Carla said, her tone professional but tinged with excitement. "He confirmed he was with Megan during the time she started seeing Ethan. He also said she broke things off with him abruptly around the time she found out she was pregnant. He's willing to take a paternity test if needed, he's curious too." I felt a surge of vindication at her words. If Jake was willing to take a test, it could prove the baby wasn't Ethan's, which would unravel Megan's entire narrative. I thanked Carla, asking her to arrange the test if possible, and hung up, my mind racing with what this could mean. If the baby wasn't Ethan's, it would expose Megan's lies not just to Ethan, but to my parents, who'd been so quick to support her new family. I decided to wait for the results before doing anything else, but knowing I had this in my back pocket made me feel even more powerful. Meanwhile, my parents started reaching out, their messages a mix of guilt and defensiveness. My mom left a voicemail, her voice trembling as she said, "Lauren, I'm so sorry for how we handled things. We didn't realize how much we hurt you. Please, let's talk." My dad sent a text, short and to the point. "We need to fix this. Call us." I didn't respond right away. I wasn't ready to let them off the hook so easily. They needed to sit with the consequences of their actions, just like I'd had to sit with the pain of their betrayal. Megan, on the other hand, went silent. I heard through Tara that Ethan had confronted her after the gathering, demanding a paternity test. Megan had apparently broken down, admitting she'd been with Jake but insisting the baby was Ethan's. Ethan didn't believe her. He'd moved out of their shared apartment, telling her he needed space until the test results came back. I couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction at the news. Megan had thought she could build a perfect life on the ruins of mine, but now that life was crumbling, and she had no one to blame but herself. A week after the gathering, I got the paternity test results from Carla. The baby wasn't Ethan's, it was Jake's. I stared at the report, my heart pounding as I processed what this meant. Megan had lied to everyone, using her pregnancy to manipulate Ethan, my parents, and even me. I forwarded the results to Ethan, along with a short message. "You deserve to know the truth. I'm sorry you got caught up in her lies." I also sent the results to my parents with a note. "This is who you chose over me. I hope you're ready to face the consequences." Ethan called me that night, his voice heavy with emotion. Lauren, I'm so sorry, he said, his words rushed. I never should have let this happen. I was an idiot, and I hurt you in the worst way possible. Megan lied to Mesh, told me the baby was mine, and I believed her. I've ended things with her. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I needed to tell you how sorry I am. I listened, my heart aching at the sound of his voice, but I felt no desire to take him back. Thank you for the apology, Ethan, I said, my voice calm. But we're done. I'm moving on, and I suggest you do the same. Focus on yourself now. I hung up, feeling a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Ethan had made his choices, and while his apology was a start, it didn't erase the pain he'd caused. My parents showed up at my apartment the next day, unannounced, their faces pale and drawn. My mom started crying the moment I opened the door, pulling me into a hug I didn't return. Lauren, we were wrong, she said, her voice breaking. We saw the test results. We had no idea Megan was lying. We should have supported you, not her. We're so sorry. My dad nodded, his expression grim. We failed you, he said, his voice gruff. We let Megan manipulate us, and we hurt you in the process. We want to make this right. I stepped back, crossing my arms as I looked at them. You don't get to just apologize and expect everything to be okay, I said, my voice steady. You chose Megan over me, even after she betrayed me. You demanded my trust fund for her, like my feelings didn't matter. I needed you, and you weren't there. I'm not ready to forgive you yet. If you want to be part of my life, you need to prove you've changed not with words, but with actions. They nodded, their faces filled with regret, and left without arguing. I knew it would take time to rebuild our relationship if I even wanted to, but I felt a sense of power in setting that boundary. I wasn't going to let them back in until I was ready, and that was a choice I got to make. As for Megan, I heard she'd reached out to Jake, who wasn't interested in being involved. She was on her own now, dealing with the fallout of her lies. I didn't feel bad for her. She'd made her bed and now she had to lie in it. I, on the other hand, was starting to rebuild my life. I used a portion of my trust fund to take a solo trip to Italy, something I'd always wanted to do, and it was the most freeing experience of my life. I came back ready to start fresh, focusing on my career, my friendships, and myself. I'd lost a lot, but I'd gained something more important: my strength, my voice, and the knowledge that I didn't need anyone who didn't value me. What would you do if your family betrayed you for someone else's lies? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Update. 1 month later. It's been a month since the confrontation, and I'm feeling stronger every day. My parents have been trying to make amends. They've started therapy to understand why they favored Megan, and they've been sending small gifts for me and checking in regularly. I'm still keeping my distance, but I appreciate the effort. Megan reached out, apologizing through a long email, but I'm not ready to forgive her. She's struggling as a single mom now, and while I don't wish her harm, I'm focusing on myself. I've started dating again, taking things slow, and I'm planning to use my trust fund to start a small financial consulting business. I'm moving forward, and it feels amazing. Update. 3 months later. 3 months later, and things are looking up. My parents have kept up their efforts. They invited me to a small family dinner. Just the 3 of us. And we had an honest conversation about everything. They've cut back on contact with Megan until she gets help for her behavior, which feels like a step in the right direction. Megan's been posting cryptic messages on social media about starting over, but I've blocked her and moved on. Ethan reached out again, asking to meet as friends, but I declined. I'm not ready for that. My consulting business is taking off, and I've been traveling more, rediscovering who I am outside of my family's drama. I'm happier than I've been in a long time. Update. 6 months later. It's been 6 months, and I'm thriving. My relationship with my parents is slowly improving. They've been consistent, showing up for me in ways they never did before, and I'm starting to trust them again. Megan reached out to meet in person, and I agreed. She apologized sincerely, admitting she was jealous of me and acted out of insecurity. We're not close, but we're civil, and I'm okay with that. I've expanded my business, and I'm in a new relationship with a kind, supportive guy who respects my boundaries. I've learned to put myself first, and I've built a life I'm proud of. My family's betrayal broke me, but it also made me stronger than I ever thought I could be. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal and empowerment, Subscribe and hit the bell for more Reddit dramas. What would you do if your family betrayed you? Let me know in the comments.